Because every time in history that there's been this huge bureaucratic thing that everyone just thinks will blow over, some dude or woman with a big mouth with an alternative opinion goes, that's enough.
For a long time, I felt the army let me down, but the answer is it's life. Sometimes you have everything and it just gets taken from you. And it's how you respond to it. You can either be the fool or you can be the hero. So.
And that's to my last point. You got to take the leap.
Does the Western world value competition? My dad didn't think so. Every morning, he would ask me, hey, did you win yesterday? Or when I got home, did you win today? I'm like, win what? He goes, did you just win? And then one day when I was 12, he came up to me and said, I'm going to compete with you because the world won. What a fascinating and intense moment. The other question he always used to ask me is, what did you learn today? And why did you learn it? And why did you think you learned it? The same question also used to be asked by my teacher, Barbara Boyer, at the end of every school day. In this episode, Kemp goes through some of the key people that have had an impact on my life. And it's been pretty intense. We cover why it's important to develop the will to win, why it's important to understand why you're learning something and get agency for your learning, and a deeper dive into who these two people are, how they're strange, how they're unique, and how they're connected. Introspection is really, really, really important. As a founder, spending some time to review who's had an impact on you can give you a newfound energy to keep going forward. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of episode 4 of the Founder's Journal, where we look at some of the people who have taught me how to win and have taught me how to learn.
So, Tom, I want to take this hour, if we can. You know, we spent time last time talking about the founder, who the founder is, what makes them, what shapes them, what challenges do they inherently face, what do they face systemically, how do other people perceive founders? Really valuable stuff. It seems to me that would be really helpful for the founders and creatives and curious who are on this trail increasingly with you, to learn a little bit more about the same things we discussed last time, but inside the stories of your own life. And I'm gonna ask you to go into your own life here, and I'm going to ask you to play a challenging game with yourself, which is, I know you well. I've read the first draft of what will be a remarkable book that you're working on, that is part memoir, part counsel and advice and eldering for founders and creatives. So I know a lot of the stories that were important, but for the purposes of this next hour, I want to kind of hone in on some very specific stories that will enable your subscribers and allies and followers and all the, pick your word, to sort of track how your thoughts on the creative's journey, the founder's journey, have been shaped by your own experience. And when I think about your experience, I'm going to think, for the purposes of our conversation today, in 3 buckets. We know there are many more buckets, but one is childhood, one is war, and one is business. And we know that the through lines run through all. But in each one, I'm going to ask you to hone in on where the operative learnings are for you, where they were, knowing that there are, when people buy the book, they're going to understand the range and depth of the stories. But for the purposes today, again, I want to just hone in on what we can draw from the story. And maybe the best way to give an example is, it seems to me that we talked about those founders, those founders as and creatives as loners and as unemployable and as saying, wait, something's here. And when I think about your childhood and I think about the entrepreneurship and your father and the way you were raised and being raised poor and having to be resourceful, I get all that. But this remarkable teacher and what happened, really specifically what happened, feels to me like a starting place, because it starts with the system not seeing you, someone seeing you, and you seeing yourself. That seems to be an elemental archetypal pathway for the founder. A, I'm wondering, is that true? And B, could you tell us that story in detail? Barbara Bowden.
Yeah, is it true? I'm not sure. I would say that every time I was given a unique opportunity, I took it. But even if I didn't want to, so I've always had some drive in me. If I took an unusual opportunity, that I would overextend in doing it, even if I didn't want to do it, and even if I went to blows with the person in the first time I met them, and I was catastrophically thrown to the ground. So I can't tell you if the founder's journey is a lineup of elders appears at unique stages and they were always going to appear, or every time I was presented a crossroads around a complex challenge and I was beaten or put him right at the bottom of the pack, I just rose to the occasion and overextended in my own way. But there's probably like 5 people that I would consider have drastically changed. Much like you've said, there's a number of CEOs that I've really worked with. One of them's my father. One of them is Barbara. One of them is a guy called Adrian. One of them is a friend called Jaden. And one of them is a guy called Paul. And, all of them had really long time span, and all of them were pure at what they did or who they were. It doesn't mean that they were good people. And there was another guy, Sam, and I would say that, he was a good person as well as doing that. So I think maybe the easiest way is to tell you the story of each of them and why each of them are important.
Beautiful. Let's do that. And you will hone in on the essence of why they're important, given our limited time. I want to just double check on one thing. I get that you rose to the occasion in each time, that you overdid, that the power in you to say yes to every opportunity from the time you were 2 all the way through your life. I recognize that in you, and I recognize it as an important thing for sure. And you are intuitively going to what I was interested in, which is sometimes forces that come to us not when we're seizing an opportunity, but what we're trying to survive. And you've picked some people who were elders that appeared at an important time. So I would love to know. I think you're exactly right. Let's start with your father. I mean, what was there between the two of you that led to your own wild yes?
My father is extraordinarily independent, and extremely quietly generous. And I saw that at an extremely young age, and I didn't know what to think about it because everyone else around him was not independent and was not generous. And where he was generous the most, because when you're poor, this is where you've got to be generous, is his time. He still does it to this day. The amount of time he gives others to develop them at what they are with zero benefit to himself, I have not seen replicated anywhere else. So he's an extraordinary sort of guy because all of his family were missionaries, priests, nuns, and teachers. And he was 1 out of 7, and he just said, I'm not going to do this bullshit. Got expelled twice, still graduated high school, went to college for 6 weeks to study to be a teacher, quit, and became a manager of a KFC and a Pizza Hut. And at some point between those jobs and meeting my mother, his ambition of getting his family out of that class, although good people, turned on. And I don't know that story. I know that he was selling cigarettes door to door, and the chairman of a very large company asked him to join the graduate program. He's like, I don't have a degree. He goes, you don't need a degree. I will teach you. And he took that opportunity and very quickly, within a few years, won the Chairman's Award for making this organization probably hundreds of millions of dollars before he was 30. But my father came up to me when I was 5, and it's an odd thing to do. He said, look, I'm not really going to help you till you can make a decision, because I can't help you. And I'm like, what does that mean? I'm 5. I'm just trying to have some cornflakes. I don't really understand why you're telling me this. And, he just worked. And then out of nowhere at 12, he turned up. And, I've been going through some therapy, and the lady has mentioned that I've overdeveloped my ability to be independent. And it's made me great at a lot of things. There's actually one of the reasons why I'm great at a lot of things. So you're great at a very young age at things that maybe people would take a lifetime to achieve. I don't think I am, but she's put me in that category. And it's because of this. She goes, you were independent at an extremely young age. And I don't know if it was that, but I also know that, he was on a mission. So the mission was elevate family from upper lower class to jumping the whole middle class. I don't want to be in this place, and I don't want my family to be. So it wasn't a selfish mission. And so I didn't really see him until I was 12, right, in a way that you would consider meaningful, although he was there, not in the case of an apprenticeship that generally exists between a father and a son, that generally occurs naturally over the course of an existence. So I might come back to him, and because I go to school, and I grew up in a house of women, so an older sister, a younger sister, and a mum. So I've become a mama's boy. So I go to school and I hate school. I escaped preschool like maybe 3 or 4 times. Hate going to primary school or elementary school, and I cry every day because I don't want to go to school. Why would I want to go to school? The rules. I don't like rules. I'm not allowed to do what I want. I'm not allowed to think what I want. And it seems rather confrontational. But I get good at sport, and I end up being okay with school until I get to grade 3, and we have to do this test called the basic skills test. It's got nothing to do with skills. It's all to do with comprehension and numerical reasoning. So math, literacy, but from an aptitude perspective. So it's assessing your cognitive ability. And I blazed through that test. I was the first to finish in the whole grade. Then I counted every brick in the classroom because I wasn't allowed to leave to go outside. And I got home and my mum's like, yeah, she goes, you said you did a great job on that test. And then like 2 weeks later, we got called in by the principal and I got in the bottom 1% of the state, and there's something mentally wrong with my cognitive ability. And, you know, the teacher that I've got for that year is crying. The young teacher doesn't know what to do with me. Like, here is the smart people, here is the whole class, here is the state, here is your son. And, you know, I end up getting, they put me through the class, and I end up going to the 4th grade. And this teacher is like, I'll take him. And this teacher's probably maybe late 40s, much older. It's like fiery, short, red hair, like extremely fit. He's like a marathon runner or something. And it's interesting that you remember some people vividly, like you can picture if they're a type of character, they get, there's a lot of things about them that make them their character, and you don't forget them. And her classroom was like military discipline. It was like, and you know, yeah, I didn't get, she picked me. She had all the smart kids pretty much in the grade in her class, and then me, and then my Lebanese friend Carter, who got extremely poor grades. And Carter was an exceptional athlete, and he was always going to be an exceptional athlete. And me and Carter were like, why are we going in this classroom like with all these nerdy people? Like, what's going on here? We don't want to be here. We want to be outside. And you know, we ended up with this teacher, and you know, the first few weeks until everyone was disciplined, there was no creative thought. And then she started asking 10-year-olds what they think of things after they learn them, which is an interesting concept when you take a step back. Why do you think we're learning this? Was one question she used to ask at the end of the day. Why do you think you're learning about this particular piece of history? Why do you think you're learning this type of math? Why do you think you're learning how to do this? And you got a whole, you know, there's always a kid, like 10 kids putting their hands up trying to fucking answer the question. And I didn't realize at the time, but she was teaching people to question what they were learning. That's an extremely interesting concept that a teacher of, you know, 20 years or so would teach a 10-year-old to start to independently think about someone who is disciplined, authority, competent, is asking you to now question what you learned from them that day and why is it important. But anyway, after like that discipline period, Barbara Boyer made me stay after class and go home and do exercises which involved me effectively saying things out loud 3 times or writing them down 3 times, even if I didn't understand them. And she did that for 2 years. And she made me go to her next class. She took that class through 2 grades, which is also another interesting concept. Because back then I just thought, oh, Barbara's teaching year 5 this year. No. She's like, I want these kids and I want to take them from this to this. And now knowing what I know about teachers and how enterprises work, that pitch would have been made. And she's probably done that 50, 60 times. Probably something like that. Or not, but it's, I did that same test with, if you do it again when you're 11 and, I then scored in the top sort of 2% of the state. And, all of a sudden you go from being, there's something extremely wrong with you, to being gifted. At the same time, Barbara's the second person, like my father, to tell you that you need to be independent and that you need to think. So, yeah, that's a little bit about Barbara. Do you have any questions?
I do. What's the difference between your characterization of your father in an extraordinary way over the cornflakes at 5, saying, I can't help you till you know how to think. And Barbara's active, dynamic intervention in your life. I see both invitations to independence, but one feels markedly different than the other. I mean, Barbara's feels very hands-on in an immediate way. I get the similarity between Barbara and your father. What's the difference?
An interesting question. I've only seen my father engage at school outside of parent-teacher interviews 3 times. It would be watching me play rugby or hockey, because I was captain of both those teams. And he had an actively played well in both sports. So I think it's something that he could understand. And in Barbara Bowyer's class, he came and taught 2 things to children. Don't you find that fascinating?
What did he teach?
One class, he taught the kids how to make fried rice, which is interesting. He's an exceptional cook. Both of my parents are, actually. I can cook. My 2 sisters can't cook for shit, so I don't know what happened there. But he came and taught the kids how to make fried rice. Now, I remember that vividly because I remember there wasn't like a parent coming in each week and teaching something. And then he came and taught, I think, like a 20-minute session on 30-minute session on economics, a real session on economics and what it meant. Now, it's very fascinating because you can see in one way, you can just say it could have just been a random churn of events that my mother's pushed him into doing something. But he doesn't. Very few people can tell him what to do, I would say, ever. And I think my mum has an ability to shape what he does, but not tell him what to do. A little bit like myself, or it could have been part of Barbara's cunning plan. Do you know what I mean? Like it's such an interesting thing that he was only ever at class with those 2 things with that particular teacher. Or it could just be, you're a competent person, I'm a competent person. We could have an impact on this group of children.
Right. Look, I'm oriented by nature to the second example, which is Barbara's cunning plan, because and you're getting at the question I'm asking. I completely honor your father's demand/invitation toward independence. But as you rightly said, I'm just trying to figure out how to eat my cornflakes. This is a big invitation. Barbara sounds to me like the one who began the process of saying independence isn't simply a matter of saying yes to every opportunity, gutting it through, overcoming being a mama's boy. Independence is actually an internal state that comes from questions, from challenge, from the refusal to zombie walk with everyone. And so I love the idea, I hallucinate the idea that Barbara's even doing a teaching for your dad. And I understand he's a larger than life figure, so don't get me wrong. But there's a way by which Barbara's saying, you come in and you do it what you want, fried rice or economics, I don't care. But you show these children pathways, because that's what I do. And it's interesting because later, as we get further on in this journey, we're going to unpack and explore. You will unpack and explore with us what this notion of independence is, because it is both a enormous asset and it's an enormously intimidating factor. It certainly makes you an extraordinary warrior and a great entrepreneur, and it has its challenges, that independence. And Barbara continues to be somebody who seemed to understand the cunning nature of unlocking you, unleashing you.
I don't know if it's just me. Every one of Barbara's students ended up becoming the school prefects that next year. And if you take another step back and you look at it, it's like we were in a really poor area called Roos, Campbelltown. And, at this point, my father is starting to greatly accelerate his career. So there is a real chance that I'll finish at this school, but my little sister won't, because we'll be out of the district. And that's what happened, by the way. And my sister kicked and screamed. She did not want to leave the poor district to go to school in a rich district with a private school. She didn't want to do it. My first day, she's 6 years old. She made a complaint to the principal, told her everything that was wrong with the school when they left. So, the other idea around this is, hey, here is a man that's driving himself out of the world that we're in. And, at the end of the day, he's a leadership figure. And one thing that I would say, Barbara Bowe, sort of the subplot is her class became the leaders of that school and then became leaders everywhere else they went. And, he's the epitome of someone that uses articulation and grit to rise to their rightful place where he should be. He's the man in the arena that can go the other way and is pulling everyone up. I would never take that from him, because that's what he did. I learned more of leadership from the military, from my father, than the military. There is no word of doubt. So, maybe even in that sort of guise, there is this idea that, at the end of the day, he's a solid leadership role model of advancing yourself to a group of reasonably poor kids.
I mean, look, we're parsing this on behalf of others, so there's no question about the sanctity of the role that your father played as father, leader, man, no doubt. Our task in this conversation is to unpack and distinguish between the various kinds of leaderships that shaped you. Barbara's leadership was different than your dad's. That's all I'm saying, even as it was built on the same principles. And I would let's put a pin inside independence as a necessary component of resilience and growth, and a vital component of intellectual integrity. So we'll come back to it. How is Adrian the next figure that appears in the story?
My father appears back in the story when I get to high school. But the other thing I mentioned on Barbara is she never told you were great, but everyone achieved great results. So,
yep,
there was no encouragement, if that makes sense. It was curiosity. So, the thing that taught me is that outcomes and actions matter more than words. And when you go to can you imagine being like 11 years old and going to your parent teacher sort of thing after 2 years, and she sits down with you and goes, "This is where you were, this is where you are now. This is what we did together to get you there. Great job." It's the only time she said it. Right at the end. Never mentioned it, never mentioned the plan, never asked permission from my parents for the plan. Let me do my thing, I'm competent. I'm just going to get on with it. So this idea of independent thinking and then just getting on with it, and outcomes and behaviors and actions speak louder than any word, doesn't leave my mind after I'm 11 years old. It's like, and also, no one thanked Barbara. There's no award. There's no nothing. She just did it again. So
is Barbara a founder?
Not sure. I think if I knew more about Barbara, she would have. She's definitely independent from the system, but
so she would qualify perhaps as a creative, not necessarily a founder.
Yeah, maybe if I knew her personally outside of that arrangement, if she had all these, you'll probably find that type of person doesn't just do well at one thing. So I don't know enough. It's a great question. So I get back into high school, and I'm like 6'2" at 12. So my sister is a brilliant mind. Older sister, brilliant. I got IQ of maybe 150 something. Younger sister's the same. Highly intelligent, highly crystallized intelligence. Very good at English, writing, speaking. But those two have had zero individual confidence. There's no presence. Like I really stopped growing at sort of 13 because I was playing so much rugby, weightlifted wrong, and all my cousins are 6'5". Big guys. So when I got to high school, you're good at rugby. Me and my older sister were going in the same area. So we went to a Catholic school in a place called Rose Meadow. It's nicknamed Rose Ghetto. So we go there. My older sister's there. My older sister's cut her teeth in high school in a very hard way, by the way. She's like Ravenclaw, if you understand Harry Potter, right? And I've come in like Gryffindor. I'm like, this guy that. So on the first day, I'm sitting on the back seat of the bus because I'm about to play football. Whereas my sister's been waiting her whole life to sit at the back seat of the bus, which has been torturous years of school. But the reason it's really important is what my dad does with me and my sister next, to me, is one of the most fascinating things. I still don't get it. I really don't get it. So he does three things that are extremely, extremely unique to me and my older sister. Not so much my younger sister. And he starts with this simple concept. He came up to both of us. He goes, the world isn't going to compete with you anymore. It's just going to tell you you're great. I don't really believe in that. Because as soon as you get out of this place, it's going to hit you. And we're like, okay. Remember, I'm like 12, 13. So I'm going to compete with you. And he said that like once. And then, a few times a week, he'd just come out of nowhere and or a few times a month, he'd come out of nowhere and just exercise with me. Well, that's what he'd do with me. I don't know what he'd do with my sister, but he'd exercise with me. And until I was 18, that man could out sprint me. He was fucking, he was beating me. And the lesson, and then, you know, when it came to class, we'd come home every day at the end of the week, and we wouldn't see him really to the weekend. And he'd go, how'd you go on your test? You know every test that we're doing. You know every assignment that we're doing. We wouldn't know that, but he'd know. He goes, what did you get? And I'd be like, you know, I came second, or, you know, I came fifth. And he'd be like, well, it's not first. Is it? I'm like, okay. So why do you think you didn't get first? I didn't really hear the second question for the first few years. So why do you think you get first? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, well, and then I started to get first. So what'd you get? 89%. So not 95. Why do you think you didn't get 95? And then got 100. You're still at school. What skills have you learned at school? So when are you going to get a job? So he would do that process again and again, consistently for years. And all I'd be thinking about is, this man is fucking impossible. You cannot beat this guy. Like, there's never any negativity, never any voice raise, never any, it was just like, it was matter of fact. And you just sit there and you look at him, and you never really notice the second question or the third question you would ask, because you were sort of just like
reeling with the performative aspect of it.
It's like the Labrador coming in with the stick, and you're like, why did you bring me this gift? This is the wrong gift. That. And you're like, you're not upset, you're just confused. It's like, what the fuck? And eventually, what starts to happen is that me and my sister start to talk about our results. And we start to share concepts and ideas, and which teachers are the right teachers to work with. And then my sister ends up being valedictorian, but confident and assured and ambitious, after being this quiet little nerd that doesn't want to speak to him. And me, on the other hand, we both stop telling Dad our results. We don't look for it. And I didn't realize that at the time, but by about 16, I didn't tell him what I got in anything. I was like, I don't fucking care. And I realized that he'd helped us individually compete with himself, like compete with him, then compete with him as a team, and then just compete with ourselves. That was it. We're on completely different streams. So that's the first thing that he did that was extremely unique, that I've never seen any. And he did it on purpose. Like, everyone will say that he didn't. He said at 5 what he was going to fucking do, and then he went and executed. So I was like, oh, so another thing that I learned after this, and I learned it at 18, was you can have a long-term game and a long-term plan, and all that matters is consistency. And you don't have to tell anyone about it. Or you could tell everyone about it and they won't believe you, but you could still just go execute it anyway. So you don't need to listen to what anyone else says. The other fascinating thing too, which I didn't realize at the time, but I also realized the importance of partnership, is that my father and mother were in on this. My mother was never upset when my father asked these questions, and it was always done in a safe manner. So, and she didn't really put us back together after it, because we were never upset. It's almost like business, is an interesting way of thinking about it. So he taught us how to compete with ourselves, no one else.
So can you just unpack for me one quick thing there? I'm tracking everything, and I love this consistency. Don't tell, go execute. When you inserted that line, you don't need to listen to anybody. Barbara would would not agree with you there. Would she? Would your dad agree with that? I mean, is the idea that competing with yourself means that you then become a solo player who determines what he thinks is right and goes after it? What is the role of those who have insight and wisdom to tell you things that maybe you don't know about yourself or about the world?
I think I think the idea that you can have a plan and you don't have to listen to people saying your plan's wrong, isn't the same as having a plan and then evolving and adapting to the world and around it. So, maybe a better way of thinking. My father had a vision for how he wanted to raise his children. And although, his vision never changed, I'm going to make them independent of the system. And that's because his family were in the system. They never sort of really went anywhere.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but let me just try to move this conversation to the piece I'm asking, which is, sure. I get what your father did. I endorse it. It's extraordinary. I get that he put you in touch with self-competition, which is extraordinary and necessary. I'm wondering for a young man who is being fashioned by unbelievably skillful people to claim his own authority and his own capacity and his own genius. Where is the space, not for the world shaping, but for those who might come and say, I think you're not looking at this. I think you don't see that. It would look like criticism. It would look like challenge, but it's actually wisdom coming from adjacent allies who have an insight that you don't have. What room does this founder or this emerging solo player give to the voices of others who might have commentary that's relevant for them? Because in your father's world, the way he's describing it, the way Barbara's doing it, it's a pretty self-enclosed place. But as you get out into the world and have to be part of a network and part of a community of thinkers, how did you adjust from voracious independence to being a network player as you are today?
I didn't adjust until I was a commander, mate.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay.
Because you think about it, if you're poor people, it's like no one's trying to help you get out of being poor. So, my father was like blinkers on, straight, like, I'm going to go so far past mastering something. Then I'm going to figure out what chaos I've created around me.
Yes. Yes.
And that actually becomes a bit of his undoing a bit later on. And then he has to rebuild himself again. But yeah, I didn't learn that till I was in charge of men at a young age.
Yeah. So let's recap. I know because we're coming up on the end of an hour here, but it's extraordinarily important because the portrait that you're painting of your origins, the story you're telling of your origins, is an extraordinary journey towards self-command.
Mm-hmm.
And it does come back to why it felt to me there was a sort of triptych of your childhood, the war, your life as an entrepreneur. It seems to me that if we've learned anything in this hour, we've learned the components of how to build that internal self-command so that you can trust yourself when you're saying, this is fucked up, it doesn't work, I want to change it. When people tell you your idea is crazy, you don't know what you're doing. Very easy for a founder or a person without that capacity for self-command, without that dogged independence, to fold, to say, oh, well, maybe, geez, Kemp's a smart guy, he's been around, he must be right. No, there is no room for people telling you you can't. There's no room for no. I want in the next hour, and I just want to move how you took that self-command into the world of people, of changing circumstances, and of the creation of networks, because you're a network leader. You believe in networks. You create networks without even knowing it. you create networks. Look at the network. As your business partner, I'm now part of all kinds of networks at a deeper way than I was before I met you, because that's what you do. But there's a shift, and the war was that shift.
No, it wasn't. I would say that the next two lessons that my dad teaches my sister and I set the shift up.
Okay, let's finish those. Finish that story. Set the shift up, and then we'll pick the shift up the next.
Yeah. So the second thing that he does is he teaches us how to sell. And you sell by understanding how to tell a story. So every evening from about 14, he would be like, what is this ad trying to tell me in watching TV for an hour? For me and my older sister, that's the same thing. What are they trying to sell? What are they trying to solve? What do you think about it? Is this a good ad? He would do that every night. Now, we just thought at the time it's because we couldn't afford cable. And I think there was a big part of it that was that. But, like me and my sister were like, what the fuck? And then we started to get really interested in it. We'd like come home and be like, hey, Dad, have you seen that billboard? What do you think about that billboard? This is what I thought about that billboard. And anyway, so he starts to do this foundational work in setting up our business acumen around sales and marketing, which is all relating to telling a story. He's getting better at, understanding consumer behavior, telling a story and how people react to it. And he has a focus on telling a new story, a unique story, a story that doesn't get told. And he comes in one day, he goes, all right, we're going to open up a family business. And at this time, we're in a very affluent area. Not the most affluent he gets us to, but a very affluent area. And he's like, he's just made a lot of money. He's like, and now he wants to spend it. I'm like, what are you doing? Okay. We're out of being poor. Why are we going to run a small business into the ground and be poor again? And my dad's a pretty fascinating man. So we open up. He goes, I want to open up with my mum my mum wanted to be back in the workforce. My younger sister was about 10. I would have been about 14. She wants to go back to work. She's been hasn't been raising kids for quite a while. So, he's got to get his mum back to work. And he's like, I want to open up a middle-aged women's dress store in this small town. This affluent small town where we're the poor people that have come into the rich people's neighborhood, and we're going to open up a store. And we're going to open it up in this arcade. This arcade has 3 other stores that do the exact same thing. And he goes to my sister, he goes, you're going to go in there and you're going to sell stuff. And he looks at me and he goes, you're going to do that too. And you're going to do the marketing plan for this store. And I just looked at him and I go, what the fuck's a marketing plan? And he goes, there's the internet. Go figure it out. So I come up with this store called Breathe Fashion. And me and my older sister after school go and look at the other stores in the arcade. And what's wrong with them. And there's nothing that shows any beauty. There's nothing beautiful about it. There's nothing that looks at the feminine sort of concept of beauty, the unusual, the rare, the unique, the colorful. It doesn't exist in any of these stores. So we come up with this idea of breathing the life back into this arcade, and we call the store Breathe Fashion. And the store, we target the exact same, early 40s, late 50s women, and all shapes and sizes, doesn't matter. And everything's focused on colorful, expressing beauty, not boring, not hidden, not hiding it, which is what everyone else is doing. And you should feel safe in what you wear. You should be beautiful. You should feel beautiful in what you wear. So we do that, and we set up this store, and it executes. And as in any new small business, not led by people that are people from the area, it goes into absolute shambles. It doesn't work. It's like hitting a wall. It's like creating a gossip engine, like it's going out of fashion. So, you know, we look at our dad and we go, we told you it wouldn't work. And he's like, nah. He goes, we just need to help people remember why looking beautiful is important, and that there are beautiful people in this town, and the beautiful people in this town don't live on that street and go to that tennis club. And that's what he said. He goes, so go figure that out. So you sit down with my mum, and then he wants to, you know, we figure out that we can run a fashion show in this small town arcade. And we're going to lock down the arcade and run this fashion show. And he goes and runs it. And it has like hundreds of people attend, who are all the same people that are gossiping. And then all of a sudden, all the other stores in the arcade are selling the same type of ideal that we are about beauty versus hiding it. And, you know, the store improves and it goes on to fail, because at the end of the day, the market in that town isn't big enough, and all the rich people want to go buy their stuff in the big city or get it shipped in from brands they can afford. But for a very fleeting moment, he changed the ideal of a whole town. Anyway, my uncle and him come in at some point, and they end up executing some effective development based off the event and traffic flow of the town. And they make all their money there. And it was never about the store. And, you know, so there was always this other plan. And then secondly, he comes in and he goes, look, mate, to be frank, he goes, you know, we lost less money on the store than your mother would have spent on shopping if she wasn't working at the store with you kids for like a year. So, okay. Okay. But I didn't realize at the time, but what he was teaching us was a trade in sales and marketing, and understanding buyers, and understanding how to shape a market, and understanding how to bring something into a new market, which are all extraordinary skills. And in every one of those things, he was getting us to engage with people that don't think, and build alliances against a narrative. And it wasn't alliances against another group of people. It was like, this town can't do this. Yes, it can. People can do anything if they come together. And then the last thing that he taught us was really strange. And he, no matter, I would always come home from school, and by the time I was in year 12, we'd gone from this affluent area to having like an estate size type property in a, you know, a mansion, so to speak. It was like 18. And when I was 18, I would have all of my friends, because I still I didn't switch high schools. Me and my older sister did, my younger sister did too. So all of my friends were the people that we grew up in Roos with. And you know, they would always be at my dad's. It would always be out on my porch talking to my dad. Now, I got to remember that he was working like 50, 60 hours, 70 hours a week. And then all of a sudden, by the time I was 17 or 18, he'd be home sitting on the porch like 3 p.m. And he'd be talking to one of these young guys, you know, whether it's Tim or it's Cameron, Scott, Potsy, Soso. These guys, rough as guts, absent a lot of the times of father figures, absent from ambition in their lives. And a lot of the time they wouldn't go to high school. They'd come to high school with me some days. Sometimes they'd just sit there. And I saw a man who has no obligation to any of these guys spend an extreme amount of time helping. And then I started to, I did my work experience or whatever it is with my father at his business. And then I got sick with glandular fever just before I did my, our version of the SATs in our final. So I didn't end up beating any, like I ended up maybe coming 10th in the grade and not first or something. And I would hear him do all these calls. And this coach, he would call people to bring him and he'd be like, "Oh, how are you, son?" That's what he'd say. Say, "Son." Never called me son. Call me boy or Wally. I used to like, "Where's Waldo?" So, but he'd call these guys son. He's like, "How are you, son? How can I help you? How'd you go?" He knew everything. He knew who their partners were. He knew what they were up to. He knew everything about their trade business. He knew where their first building that they shop fitted. He would connect them to leading tradesmen to commence an apprenticeship. And then with his work, you know, he'd have all these young men and women that he'd work for in this big company, and every call would be, "Hey, how are you going? I can see you. Did you do that thing?" And it was this extreme level of personal development. Probably, you know, I would say more than 100 times I saw it between 16 to 18 to different people. And I didn't ask anything about it. I just watch and listen. And the lesson that I took away from it is, what was really interesting, he would always take every call. So, you know, if someone like Soso would be like, "Hey, you know, could you speak to someone?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll give him 5 minutes. What do you need? What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve?" And then if there was a business trying to get into one of his shopping centers, they'd be like, "What do you do?" "Oh, I run a fish and chip shop." "How good's your fish and chips?" "It's pretty good." "All right, let's go eat some and let's see how we can get you in. If it's good, we'll get you in. If it's not, we'll tell you why it's not good. You go back to it. So this idea of being open to every conversation, generous with your time, and if people wanted it, I'll listen and give you some coaching, and I'll coach the ambition that you've got, or I'll guide the ambition that you've got. I saw across hundreds of instances between 16 and 18 before I joined the army. And the thing that I took away from it was you need to walk among kings, but you need to speak with the common tongue. He never made anyone feel like he was extremely intelligent, better than them, knew more. Every conversation was a learning opportunity for him. 2, if you are lucky, like we are, then anyone that was in your tribe that's not as lucky, you have the obligation to put your hand out. No matter when, no matter what. And like that put me instead to being a good commander in the army. And then the last thing that was really fascinating is spending that time with people gave him purpose and helped him feel good. So, you know, whether or not I've always tried to figure out how a man like that survived in corporate. And I think it's that.
Yeah.
And so those teaching how to actually market and do it as a trade and skill he taught. So the networking skills became valuable because a bigger group of people passionate about something can change a whole story. And then 2, watching him develop people with no benefit, no immediate benefit to him, would always benefit him later, no matter what it was, even if it was his character that was with the biggest benefit.
Well, look, in the in the next conversation, I want to take this journey of independence and humility and tribal affinity into the space of the war, which was a very powerful shaping experience for you. And then we're going to put it all together in your life as an entrepreneur and as a founder in business. But I appreciate this morning very much.
Likewise.
And I would leave you with one question that I'm going to think about, and I don't want you to answer it here. I'm going to have the last word. But there is something about, in the grandeur of developing people, of Barbara and your father and your mother and your sister, there's no doubt that all the ingredients of a powerful kind of curriculum, leadership curriculum, human curriculum are present. And I'm really intrigued by this idea of listening. I watched and listened, you said, with great authority and power. And the corresponding, you don't listen to anyone who tells you who you are. It's completely congruent to me. But I want to learn after we do the war and after we do the business, I want to do one more session where we come back to what is the nature of listening? What is the nature of not only developing people, but being developed by people? Because I think that in the mutuality, you said something about Barbara and your father. I never asked my father this, you said. I don't know who Barbara is. Is she a founder? I don't know. It's perfectly understandable for you not to know the other side of the story. But as you progress through this journey, I want to know how the sense of mutuality, of understanding how people are developing you, even when they don't have the capacity to develop you. They're not nearly at the stage you're at. They don't have the experience you have, but they're still capable of offering you deep insight inside the space of mutuality. I want to just explore that with you. So I appreciate your credible directness and masterful storytelling, and there's more down the line here.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be I think the thing that I'm unsure about is, what was my sister thinking?
Yeah. Beautiful.
And what about everyone else in those classes? Like, why have I ended up in this position when they're all smarter than me?
Right.
They're all more disciplined in a lot of ways. So it's interesting now, taking a look at it, how many other founders just uniquely end up being the first that walks into the arena and not knowing that they're in there until the first blade comes across.
Right.
And I for me, that next part of the story is all with a guy called Adrian Mills.
Great.
And he's the guy that teaches me how to be a warrior.
So tune in next time, please, to learn about Adrian, and thank you for that. And I'll speak to you soon.
Definitely.